All right, you've got all of us here. It's like it's 2020 all over again because we're doing this virtually. But Representative Crockett, why don't you tell us why you're seeking the seat right now? And I think just attached to that question is have you been are you seeking the seat partly because you've been gerrymandered out of your congressional seat? So the motivation for running now, but then also the gerrymandering question.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, it's great to be with y'all again. And those of you in San Antonio know that I was just there and quite busy. But there's a couple of things at play. I think that we are at a unique place in history in this country. And when I sat back and I asked myself, what more could I do? Every time that I've run for office, it's been about taking my advocacy to the next level. So here it was, there definitely was a lot of chatter about whether or not I should run. And frankly, I wanted to know whether or not I was viable. That was as we were going through this kind of gerrymandering situation. In fact, the one reason that a lot of people actually started to really think that I was actually going to look into this was because I had done an interview on Sirius XM. And basically, I was asked about the gerrymandering. This is while we were going through the process. And I said, if they decide to gerrymander our seats, I may just have to, or if they decide to snatch our seats, I may have to snatch one of their Senate seats. And so then people were like, well, wait a minute, is this a very real thing? But, as someone who has been involved in politics a lot longer than most people kind of know, as someone who's been a Democratic Party chair out in East Texas, in Bowie County, Texas, in my early 20s, I am someone who has watched this state and understand that on the Democratic side, we have not necessarily had the infrastructure that we need, nor have we had the investments that we need to really move the needle. But as I have traveled this country and I have seen the shift and I have watched the numbers as it relates to how much people are shifting since the election of Donald Trump, they have been shifting no less than 10 points towards the Democrats throughout the entirety of the country. So I looked at all these races and I said, maybe this is an opportunity for the Democrats, but in the state of Texas, I am not of the impression that it's enough that we get a bump. I think that we have to have a little bit more than a bump. I think a bump gets us close. But if we have the same electorate that we've had for the last 30 years, I think we can expect the same exact results that we've had for the last 30 years. So here it was 4 days prior to filing deadline closing. And I already had my poll numbers, my internal poll numbers. And I have been talking to various people, whether it was talking to, a Stacey Abrams, who could talk to me about what it looked like to organize Georgia and get voter participation up. Because one of the reasons that Georgia actually did go blue was because they actually increased voter participation. We know the state of Texas actually has a voter turnout as well as a voter suppression problem. And so I had been engaged in those conversations because polls are just polls, right? Like they give you a snapshot in that moment of how people feel. But to be able to win, you've got to do more than kind of just have that snapshot. But it gave me a starting point to know whether or not this was outside of the realm of possibility. So as I continued to have conversations about safety concerns, as I continued to have conversations about what it would look like for me to be attacked over and over and over, the Supreme Court then decided that they would not reverse, but allow for Texas to go through with their maps. These maps have been struck down, at least for the moment, by a Trump-appointed justice. And I say by it, the opinion was written by a Trump-appointed justice. I had been engaged in the litigation since 2021. I had testified in front of that 3-judge panel. And to know that this Supreme Court would allow this to go through, it basically reaffirmed all of the frustrations that I was feeling in that moment, and basically the frustrations that I think most people are feeling in this country, where it seems as if we have lost all checks and balances. But the only way that you make it to the federal judiciary is if you go through the Senate. So I serve as a member of the Supreme Court task force, where we have 3 bills. We have been looking at the Supreme Court, but the reality is that there's only one body that has oversight over the Supreme Court, and that is the U.S. Senate. When I then go back and look at all the other frustrations, most people ended up learning who I was when I was in the State House, and I was one of those that initiated the quorum break that took place as I was a freshman. We were fighting over voting rights right then. And so next thing you know, it's a full circle moment because Nancy Pelosi did put the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act on the floor. She did put the Freedom to Vote Act on the floor, and they passed. But unfortunately, we did not have the numbers in the Senate. So I do want to be clear. If we had a blue senator in the state of Texas, I would not be running. Because for me, this was not about aspirations of getting a title. This is about aspirations of saving our democracy. This is about aspirations of making sure that we can change the numbers, not only for Texas, but this changes the trajectory of our democracy in this entire country. And so after looking at numbers, after talking to people from around the country that I had gone and either done surrogacy work for, or otherwise, I felt confident that we could build the coalition that we needed to build to actually be able to win by expanding the electorate.
I appreciate that. And I want to follow up with you or have the team follow up with you on Senate issues, Venezuela, the judiciary, as you mentioned. But let's just sticking with sort of electability and an election type of question, because I think this does play into, should you win, sort of like how you would represent the state, right? Is that, we've seen a back and forth between you and Stephen Smith. There are, and it's sort of around like rhetoric directed at Donald Trump or the Hot Wheels comment. So talk to us about that rhetoric, because he's essentially saying, hey, is this going to win in the general? Can you pull independent voters over in the general? Can you represent kind of like all Texans should you win, right? So I'd like to hear your response to that type of discussion that we're hearing in the primary right now.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question. It is one that we tested for. Because I am a data-driven girl. So we tested some of those hot takes, including Hot Wheels. We did test for that. Now, it seemed like the rest of the country kind of really spun out, but that's because that particular comment was made when I was in Los Angeles. But I actually have text messages from Republicans that are elected, and they were like, but he's been called that for years. But nevertheless, the point is this: we did test for these things to see how they resonate in Texas versus just we understood how they resonated on a national level. Actually, there seemed to be movement towards me. So we want to dig into that to figure out why that would be. And I think that that's something that actually requires a focus group, because polling only gives you kind of numbers, but it doesn't give you information about why. I personally, if I had to guess, which is kind of what we were having to do because we did not also have time to then conduct a focus group prior to me making a decision, I think that there is something to be said for authenticity. And that is one of the things that I've consistently heard around the country, is that people are a little bit leery, at least specifically right now, of people that they feel as if are just kind of the perfect patty, or people that are trained to say certain things. And so I think, that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that I've talked to various people, independents as well as Republicans, that have told me that the one thing that they like most about me is that they know where I stand. And so I think that it projects that, I do have confidence. And if you go low, I am not your traditional Democrat. And when you look at the polling for traditional Democrats overall, the trends, if we're looking at the trends right now, the Democratic base is not that enthused by kind of the generic kind of Democrats in general. They are feeling as if we are not meeting the moment, the fierce urgency of now. And there have been a lot of comments. I've even talked to my colleagues that have asked me to come into their districts. I've gone into those frontline districts at their request with some of this stuff being out there. And I asked them, are you sure? Because I never want to hurt anyone. And they've told me, yes, we're sure. I've gone into some of those frontline districts. I've campaigned for those candidates, and they've been reelected. In fact, we know that historically what the Republicans have done is they've tried to drag down Democrats with certain other Democrats that they feel like are super leftist and that kind of stuff. And so we've seen them do this to Nancy Pelosi. We've seen them do this to AOC, where they've tried to use them. And I've not been used in any frontline district whatsoever in an effort to actually hurt them, because I just don't think that the numbers are there that suggest that I actually hurt those candidates.
Okay. I'm going to just ask one more question and keep myself on mute for a while so that other folks can chime in. But let's talk about Homeland Security, what we've seen in Minneapolis, and the role that you believe the Senate should have in terms of oversight of that federal agency.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I am actually headed to Minneapolis today, so I'll finish with y'all. I'll go vote, and I'm catching a flight. We are having a field hearing in Minneapolis. So I currently serve on Judiciary and on the Immigration Subcommittee. I obviously don't serve on Homeland, not obviously, but I don't also serve on Homeland. And so I do know that I think our Homeland Committee is also going in. I think that both on the House side as well as the Senate side, we have an obligation to not only put things on the record and do our investigations. And one of the advantages, I believe, so long as we flip this seat, I feel very confident that if we flip the Texas seat, that means that the Senate has flipped. That means that we now have the subpoena power. That also means, as of yesterday, I signed on to impeachment of our Homeland Security of Kristi Noem. Sorry. I signed on to impeach her. And with that, there still has to be that other leg, right? There has to be a conviction that we get out of the Senate. And so I do think that it is really important that we specifically get the Senate and we get the numbers, and Texas has the ability to bring the numbers. And that's why I say it's bigger than Texas. And this is about our democracy as a whole. So long as we get the numbers, that means that Democrats control the subpoena power, and we're able to dictate who has to come in front of us. Right now, we don't have that ability per se, right? Like it's lacking. It also determines whether or not, if we are to get articles of impeachment, then it is the Senate that kind of has to finish the job. We know that Donald Trump was impeached twice by the House, but ultimately was allowed to run for re-election because there wasn't a conviction in the Senate. So I think that it's important that we flip the numbers so that we can do the oversight that's necessary. We've also engaged in litigation because members have been precluded from getting into immigration facilities. I think that we can actually go back to most likely enforcing the law in a lot easier way, because the law specifically says that, much like parents who decide they want to pop up and check on their kids and make sure that they actually clean their rooms, we have that ability too. We wrote that into law. And right now, ICE and DHS has basically said, hey, you aren't allowed to come in unless we give you permission, and you have to give us a heads up. Well, then we're not able to do the inspections in the way that we intended. So we really are in a constitutional crisis, if I had to keep it short, which is yet another reason that I am running. But we've not had Kristi Noem come before us on the House side. On the Senate side, she has had to show up. And I think that we could do a lot more if we just had the numbers.
Well, and I want to continue on that discussion about the numbers, because, of course, the math is really tough in terms of flipping the Senate to begin with, and then beyond that, of course, with the filibuster and getting much accomplished. So I'm curious your thoughts about what could be done as a Democratic senator. Do you think that there is a path to persuade Republicans on certain issues in order to overcome the filibuster and get some things accomplished policy-wise? Or do you see it more as a matter of like using the subpoena power, other sort of legislative tactics as far as holding the Trump administration accountable?
I think it's the combination of both. I think that we absolutely have to make sure that we get the numbers so that we can use the subpoena power and start to build this record. And depending on what happens, a few years down the road, once this administration is gone, we would have that information. I also think that it's really important that we understand kind of the fact that the filibuster does have carve-outs when they want them. And so I think that if we are in the majority, while I don't see a pathway for getting rid of the filibuster, I do think that there are arguments to be made within the caucus, so long as we have the numbers, around things such as voting rights. We know that we ended up kind of in this race for arms, so to speak, over redistricting because we did not do a carve out for voting rights. We know that right now the Supreme Court is continuously rolling back sections of the Voting Rights Act. And so in order to protect our very fundamental democracy, I think when it comes to constitutional issues, such as access to the ballot box, I do think that one of the most powerful tools would actually be in making sure that we did a carve out specifically for voting rights. If we protect voting rights and make sure that people have access to the representation that they seek, then I think that we will be in a different position as it relates to the policies that are moving forward. Right now, we know that there are a number of policies that are not popular with the American people, but because there is a bit of a limitation of who is actually gaining access to the ballot box, we know that they're just pushing through with an agenda, even though it pales in the face of what the people are asking for. So I think that that's one of the ways that we could do more, is if we literally do better about voting rights, and then at that point in time, people be able to get the representation that will look out for them when it comes to healthcare, will look out for them when it comes to affordability, and so forth. Because right now, we do know, specifically in Texas, as we lead in uninsured, that we are in a position, and I'm telling you this because we're seeing the retirements. People are not knowing what to do. And that's why I'm bringing up, if we just know that on both sides of the aisle, that people will be able to elect whomever it is that they really want, I think that we will have both a House and a Senate that will be held more accountable to the people, instead of just doing whatever the executive have told them to do. So I know you asked me about specifically talking to Republicans. We know that Tom Tillis is most likely leaving because of this environment. But even when we talk about some of the other folk that really don't want to leave, right? We look at the Affordable Care Act and that tax subsidy that was passed out of the House. We had about, I think, 17 Republicans that crossed over. They only crossed over because they were all in vulnerable positions. Same thing with the War Powers Resolution out of the Senate. We had a number of them that crossed over, but most of them did it because they felt like it was the right thing to do. And then what we saw was a reversal. So I think if people feel like, you know what, if I do this and it's not popular, and my state is not allowed to suppress certain votes. So we have the same day voter registration. We have online voter registration. I think that people will start to get nervous about having to answer to the people. The final point that I'll make is that while there is always amplification of the fact that I know how to fight when I need to fight, I have always worked with Republicans. I mean, it's kind of hard to be a legislator and not do it. And so I've even worked with Senator Cornyn, to be clear. So I do think that there are ways to find common ground. Senator Cornyn and I have a number of bills that are together. And in fact, one of those bills, the Grant Transparency Act, was signed into law by Joe Biden. And so I plan to continue to work together where we can. I just have red lines around certain things, and they would look like things like signing up for things that will make it more difficult for people to access democracy.
I want to kind of continue the same thread that Josh and Bridget have started. Josh began this by saying because this is virtual, there's 2020 all over again, and it's 2020 all over again because of a killing in the street of Minneapolis. Which, in 2020, the Floyd murder created this greatest mass mobilization we've ever seen in American history, but it kind of fizzled out. What was missed legislatively that could have been taken advantage of that energy? And then now, and you may have answered this with Bridget's question about voting, what can be done legislatively to capitalize, to use this energy, this outrage that we're seeing now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. 2020, I was actually running. It was COVID. That was when I was running to go to the state house. And as a civil rights lawyer who's always helped those that have been in the streets, represented over 600 protesters pro bono. And when I got to the House, and one of the things that I said I would do is I would work on legislation that would minimize contacts with the general public and law enforcement. I felt like if we could minimize the contacts, then we would be in a better position as relates to things that go off the rails. So I filed a number of bills on the state level. On the federal level, we know that they worked on the George Floyd and Policing Act. And so, this was to ban chokeholds. This, involved body cams. And we know that, yes, body cams are a thing, but not every agency has them. So it brought about some sort of uniformity around that. It involved making sure that we could have data and statistics on officers. It did a lot of things, but it never got anywhere. And actually, Tim Scott was one of the Republican senators that was actually working in a bipartisan way. It was a bicameral, bipartisan kind of thing that they were working on in that moment, but they still could not get the numbers, even though Tim Scott was a lead on this legislation. I can tell you that in the wake of this, before the wake of this, because I get the phone calls right now, as a sitting member of Congress, we're working on those cases, those immigration cases. So we're getting the stories like up close and personal of some of the things that are taking place. I will tell you that it's more so the detention facilities that we're having our biggest problems with, specifically in the state of Texas. But I will tell you that I filed the Clear ID Act. The Clear ID Act was all about unmasking agents. This was born out of an amendment that I had introduced during reconciliation that basically was like, hey, you don't get federal funds if your officers are masked. I argued that by allowing these officers to mask themselves, that it is actually a danger not only to the officers, but to the community. And when we were in committee and doing the reconciliation package, I actually played video footage where I spliced where there were people that were saying they were ICE and committing crimes, and then there was ICE and they were committing crimes. And if you're the general public, you don't know. In fact, there have been stories about people that have gone out saying they're ICE and they've kidnapped people, they've tried to sexually assault people, that kind of stuff. And so when you have literally masked people, and yeah, it can cause a lot of confusion. And it can also make the general public not be as responsive because they don't know. So I made the arguments for that, but I filed that bill. Rokana and I are also co-leading another bill because as time went on, like you'll see like the filings of these bills, as time went on and things started to escalate, we worked on a bill that does some of the things we were looking for in the George Floyd Policing Act. It actually requires body cams. It also requires no face mask. It also allows for there to be an independent commission that would actually have oversight and like actually look, which we know a number of cities set up similar kind of boards within their city to actually be able to review what was going on. So it has review boards. It has a number of things in it. But I actually went a step further. So the day after what happened to Renee Good, I went into judiciary. We were in a markup and we were supposed to be marking up some different bills. The Democrats decided that we were not going to act as if it was business as usual. And instead, we talked about what was going on as it relates to Minnesota. And I actually serve as the ranking member on oversight on judiciary, the subcommittee. And so right now, we're actually going to get a letter probably out the door today or tomorrow to my chairman, number one, requesting that we have a hearing specifically on this because we serve as oversight on the Judiciary Committee. So that's number one. Number two, as I sat there and more information was coming out the next day, there was conversation around the fact that the federal agencies were not going to work with the local agencies to conduct what typically is an investigation that would be run simultaneously together. They said they weren't going to do anything with the locals, and the locals were interested in conducting an investigation. So I am actually in the process of drafting a bill. I think we've sent it up to Ledge Council already, that actually would require us to do certain things from the federal level when there is a federal officer that is involved in such a situation, that we actually conduct our investigation side by side. We've never really had this happen this way, so I would rather formalize something. And I think that maybe it could get bipartisan support. I know that there are people like a Thomas Massie who consistently, seemingly just kind of stands on values. And so I could see potentially a Thomas Massie and a few others that would be willing to engage. I will also say that we're in a unique position as it relates to our numbers right now in the House. So we are going to try to move forward with something specifically on Minnesota if we can, because we know that the Republicans lost Marjorie Taylor Greene, and sadly enough, a gentleman that I actually serve on the Agriculture Committee with, Congressman LaMalfa, passed away this past week. And we also know that the special election is taking place in Houston on the 31st. And so we will have a Democrat that will emerge as the winner. So we will have another Democrat to add. And then we also know that the special election to replace Mikey Sherrill, who now is now the governor for New Jersey, that is taking place maybe a week or two after that, the very beginning of February. So we know that the numbers are only getting tighter and in our advantage. So we do have a window. It would be interesting to see what would happen in the Senate, but we do have a window within the House to potentially get some things moving.
If I could piggyback just a little bit more on the immigration discussion. One thing, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the policies Democrats should embrace to maintain security at the border. And what I mean by that is, I think, there are many contributing factors to the 2024 election outcome, but one of them was a perception among American voters that the Biden administration failed to control or secure immigration, right? So I'm really interested to hear from Democrats who would understandably decry the policies we're seeing from Homeland Security right now for many reasons, but at the same time are very vulnerable when it comes to this question of could Democrats empower, secure, control the flow of undocumented immigration. So let's hear your thoughts on the security policies that you believe Democrats need to embrace or that you would champion if you're in the Senate. I mean, obviously you're in the House, you can champion them now, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I got you. Here's the deal. I think that you said a lot in that moment. I just want to be clear. I do think that one of our challenges, and then I will get to the specific policies, one of our challenges as Democrats is that we don't know how to talk about immigration at all. I mean, I think that that's challenge number one. Challenge number one is literally being able to communicate. And so for me, the way that I look at it is I feel as if there is a conflation between border security and immigration. I don't think that they are the same. I do obviously understand the overlap, but to say that we do immigration means that we're not secure is kind of what comes out of the Republicans, right? So one of the things that I believe in that was part of the bipartisan legislation that the Biden-Harris administration was trying to get passed was, number one, I don't believe in border walls. I don't. And that's just based upon like what makes sense. Maybe it's the criminal defense attorney in me who has seen it all, where there is a will, there is a way, right? So I don't believe that a border wall is the answer. I think that it is cost prohibitive. What I do think is that we have to invest in more drone technology. We know that modern day wars are actually being fought with drones themselves. And so if we actually decide that we are going to get out of the Stone Ages and get into the modern day, then I think that we would invest in drone technology that, number one, could cover a lot more space. Number two, could also detect weapons and drugs. So one of the things that we were really pushing for in that legislation was to have modern day technology. This also would take some of the hassle, not the hassle, but it would relieve our Border Patrol a bit, right? Because you've got this. So definitely that. I also think that we have to make the investments as it relates to our court system. Right now, I don't even know what the wait time is, but I can tell you that prior to me entering Congress and prior to COVID, the average time for someone to kind of move through the immigration court was no less than 7 years. So with that type of slow rolling, let's say somebody has a valid case that they're trying to bring about. Well, okay, it took 7 years, but let's say they don't have a good case for asylum or whatever process it is that they're trying to move through. Well, we've allowed somebody to be here who potentially has been a danger this entire time. And so I think efficiency is one of those things that we have to be really good about. We've got to be able to move people through, and we've not made those investments either. We've had judges and a judiciary that has been overloaded. We've got caseworkers that have been overloaded. And frankly, one of the biggest complaints that we had specifically from Border Patrol officers is that they literally just could not cover, when we're talking about our border, let me be clear, because obviously we have more than one border. This is me talking specifically about the Texas border. Just because of how vast it is, we would have officers that would have to then go down and leave their families for sometimes 6 weeks or more at a time. So we also were having a morale issue within the agency because at any given time, they're like, hey, you got to go because we just don't have enough bodies. So do I think we could get more bodies? Possibly. But do I think that we would be in a better position if we actually just upgraded and got technological? I do. I think that that would actually present us with a lot more options. And then obviously, we've had our fair share of issues with the CBP app. But I do think that having technology is very helpful as it relates to making sure that we are getting as much information from people prior to them even reaching our border. And then the final point that I'll make is that when it comes to immigration in general, I think that we've not engaged in the conversations around what is prompting people to actually come to our border. I think that that's one thing we failed to do and recognize. I remember the images of the horseback officers whipping Haitians in the water and whipping them back. But nobody asked the question about why are the Haitians at the border? And so, that's supposedly work that, the Biden-Harris administration had been digging into. And some of the work that the vice president was supposed to be doing was to find the reasons. So I'm in a long way about this. I think that we can't just talk about specifically at the border if we're going to talk about border security. I think that people have to understand that it's bigger than that. We have to have good relationships with those that potentially would have migrants at our borders so that we can know what is going on in those countries. It has always been less expensive and safer for us to invest in things like soft power, right? So if you're talking about a country where they're having economic issues, it has always been cheaper for us to engage in smart trade policies that maybe will provide them with opportunities that mean that people aren't necessarily trying to come here. So, I take it past just you're at the border. I take it to what happened specifically in Haiti. Well, their government was destabilized and the gangs took over. What we're seeing happen in Venezuela, well, we know is pure chaos as Maduro was removed. And again, I don't want anyone to interpret me as saying that as Maduro was a good guy. But when you have these things that take place, it is important for us to, number one, see that it's taking place and prepare accordingly, right? As well as I think that we're failing at really having the relationships that we need to have, whether we're talking about Mexico. I don't know whether or not we're going to be able to get cooperation out of Mexico when we have a president that is threatening to drop bombs in Mexico, right? So I think all of these things play a role in our actual border security, because I've actually argued that we are now in a less secure situation because of the kind of threats that are being thrown out there about potentially dropping bombs in various places, making the rise of hate against the United States a very real thing, and coupling that along with the improperly impounded funds as it relates to USAID that has caused us to lose a lot of our soft power. So I think all of this actually plays a role, specifically on border security. Now, if you ask me about immigration just in and of itself, I do think that we need to have a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. I do think that we need to work very closely with our farmers and ranchers as we talk about the visas that they need. I do think that we need to be engaging in conversations with, honestly, all industry and businesses that are saying, hey, we need this particular workforce. One of the reasons that the United States has actually been able to be the economic power that it's been is because we've actually done immigration. For those that study immigration and what it looks like other places, if you look at Japan and what happened when they decided that they would do no immigration, it was not good for Japan. So because we, and granted, I will tell you that I believe Republicans are arguing that we need to have more babies, right? Like that is an argument that some of them have made in order to make sure that we are keeping up with all that we have going on in the United States. But I'll give you one example and then I'll move on. I will tell you that one of the congressional delegation trips I've been on is to Thailand. And Thailand actually produces like more nurses than almost anyone. And so, as we came as there was reference to 2020 and we were coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that we know that we struggled with and we still struggle with is our healthcare staff, right? And so if you have a need in a specific space and there are people that have been trained, then we need to be making sure that we are doing everything that we can to take care of everyone here at home, because you can't make a nurse overnight. That's not how that works, right? And so we do have to be able to globally access talent throughout the world. And historically, that is why we have always been great and strong, is that we have done that. And so I do think that, I'll never turn my back and say, we can't have immigration, because I just disagree with that. I know from an economic standpoint, it is smarter policy to make sure that we're engaging in smart immigration.
Congresswoman, you were talking about technology on the border, so let me segue over to artificial intelligence and ask you, with all the threats that it poses, mixed with the potential that it poses, what should Congress be doing right now? Are they too hands off, or should they just leave it alone and let it develop and see where the chips fall? Where do you stand?
Yeah, this is a good one. I'll probably want to run this tape back years from now to see if my thoughts were right. So I am actually a member of the AI caucus. It's led by Ted Lieu, a person that I respect when it comes to technology, that is for sure. And so I will tell you that what we have tried to do as a part of that caucus is engage in conversations with those that are engaged in AI. I think that one of our biggest problems is that we have this monster, and I call it a monster to the extent that it's big. Okay, not saying it's big and bad, but it's a big thing. But the vast majority of Congress has no understanding. Like, we don't have a bunch of like techies in Congress. And so I do think that we are at a disadvantage in a space. We are the regulators, and we don't have the expertise that I feel like is requisite to be able to actually regulate or legislate. Let me say it that way, right? So I had actually proposed, I had sat down with and started conversations with a number of ambassadors. And this was under the Biden-Harris administration, because I thought maybe we could get something going because we were in divided government. AI, along with the internet as a whole, and in all things that are kind of internet driven, right? For me, I don't think that it's limited to borders. I believe that it's everywhere, which is why I bring up the internet, the World Wide Web, right? And so what I thought would be most effective in our country and for the world was if we combined forces. So much like we have our allies when it comes to everything else, I felt like this was a space that we needed to operate in and make sure that our friends were all working together and we were combining our talent. And so, you know, a lot of my concerns are around those that are not our friends and what they would do with some of the technology. So that's pretty much how I was initially thinking about it. Obviously, we have other challenges, even if it's not from foreign spaces, but being able to get, you know, multiple countries working on this and coming up with a regulatory framework that would work everywhere, I felt like would be the smarter way. To specifically answer another portion of your question, I don't think that we should just let it run wild. I don't. I do think that it is a double-edged sword. I think that we need to, I guess my philosophy on all technologies is just this. I think that we need to allow for innovation, because I don't know that we would be sitting here with this thing. I don't know that we would be sitting on Zoom right now, but for allowing for innovation. So I absolutely believe in innovation. I also know that we have to make sure that we are not stifling innovation, but also making sure that we are providing for guardrails and safety. And I think that we are a bit handicapped as lawmakers because we don't have the expertise running rampant in Congress, if I'm being honest. And right now, I will also say that to your other specific question of is Congress doing enough? My answer is no. And I think I've given part of the reason why I think we're not doing enough. I also think that in this administration, there are a lot of techies that have been very influential with the executive branch, and whatever it is that they want, they are getting, and it is not necessarily to our benefit. And so the final point that I'll make, because I'm sure somebody else wants to ask questions, is my other concern around some of the AI data centers. You know, we know that I'm an environmental girly. I'm sure y'all know this already. I was a founding member of the Climate Caucus on the state house level. And, you know, anyway, so I have concerns about the environment. And I know that there have actually been protests around a number of these AI centers, specifically in Texas. And I can tell you, as somebody who also served on the Agriculture Committee, that I was hearing about water issues and water complaints from my farmers for a while, right, before we were having this. And so the amount of power that it pulls, the amount of water that is necessary, just the overall amount of resources, I think specifically for Texas, I know they look at Texas and they're like, it's big and it's vast and we've got plenty of space. But as we know that we already have challenges, I think that part of what we need to do is we need to understand and be able to specifically communicate to our communities what it means to have an AI center that comes in. And then the final point that I'll make is that in the AI caucus, we have been working on what does it look like to try to modernize our workforce, because we have to make sure that we take that into consideration too. Is, you know, how many people are we looking at losing jobs, and how is it that we modernize and keep up? So these are all things that I think we have to take into consideration. And these are the very many reasons that I just don't think we can let it run wild.
I have a quick question. I know, and it's not probably a quick answer, but it kind of piggybacks on Tony's question, and it talks about kind of the modernization of workforce. A growing percentage of our population in the United States is struggling to access healthy food and access a quality and equal education. As we think about modernizing workforces, it's really hard if people don't have access to all of the educational tools that they need and have enough healthy food to go to school and develop on a day in and day out basis. I'm curious about your thoughts just on kind of those two very big issues as it relates to, food, nutrition, and education.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for how you phrased it. Because I don't know that people are typically every day making the links between our children, specifically our kiddos, and their development, or it being stifled by not having access to nutritious foods. And so this is work that I worked on. I almost feel like I pitched this question to you when I was on the Agriculture Committee. Specifically because in my district, Texas 30, as well as in most of our rural areas, accessing fresh and healthy foods has been a challenge for a lot of reasons. All right. So I worked on, so we have a great urban farm in my district that is fantastic. It also has a restaurant. And so to me, it was a model that we could use because it is in a food desert. So while they may not have, grocery stores, they only, have a lot of like the mini marts and things like that, gas stations. This is in the heart of a food desert. It's a nonprofit model. It is absolutely fantastic because you can get the fresh grown food right there. And they also accept SNAP benefits. So it was a model that I ended up developing legislation out of. And basically, it was to engage in co-ops and make sure that co-ops had access to dollars. If, as defined under my legislation, it was considered to be a food desert. So this was something that could work for urban and rural, because this is actually a challenge for many in rural America as well. I don't remember the specifics of the of how I defined, a food desert and that kind of stuff, but it allowed them to access capital without some crazy interest rate. And so one of the challenges that we get as it relates to a lot of the grocery stores is they're looking at the market and they're saying, oh, profitability. I needed to, in my mind, put it into a nonprofit space. And historically, what we see a lot of our like city governments or local governments in general try to do is they try to give them tax incentives to maybe move into certain spaces, but it's still very difficult sometimes to get them to move into those spaces. So that's number one. Number two, another thing that I worked on, I think Cornyn is actually, Cornyn is my Senate bicameral companion on this, is called the SHOP Act, SHOPP. And what that is that was all about making sure that there would be parity between what we would consider to be fresh food and frozen food. Because there's GusNIP where you can get an additional $1 for fresh foods. But we know that nutritionally, frozen foods carry the same nutritional value. And people weren't able to get their additional dollars for the frozen food. So we worked on that. I think we were able to get the actual language into the Farm Bill, which we still are behind on passing that 5-year Farm Bill. We're 3 years behind right now. But I think we were able to get that into that last cycle. But what this would do is for some of those food deserts, they may have, the local gas station that has the frozen food, but then they couldn't get the extra money. We had also worked on a bill. I don't know if it was a part of that or something else, but we know that, again, going back to COVID, during COVID, they allowed for people to get food at the gas station and in different places. They were able to get hot food, long story short. So we worked on a deal as well so that like you could also, even if you're not at the grocery store, get hot foods from non-traditional spaces like the gas stations. In fact, one of my early things that I did is I went over to one of our gas stations and they taught me how to make a pizza in the back. And we talked through the bill. So that's that. I also think that we have to make sure that we are focused on, this is kind of outside the realm of the Senate, but I got to answer the question fully and completely, in my opinion. We've got to work to apply some pressure on the state level because we know that those funds that the federal government sit down, we know that the governor, as it relates to our kiddos and getting food during the summertime, he wasn't about taking those funds. So I think that we need to do more as it relates to kind of elevating this particular issue because we do have so much food insecurity amongst so many of our kiddos. And if we are going to say that there's equal access, then it does have to start with making sure that they have nutritious food and have it consistently and not just on the days that they go to school. I am also sad to report that we were unable to block some of the harm that is going to come as a result of the Big Beautiful Bill, because as we talked about the reduction in SNAP benefits that took place in that bill, it also is impacting dollars that are going to our schools. And that means less kiddos will have access to that food. So for me, making sure that we are smart about how we grow out access to food by not just having for-profits be the only option to be able to actually get food into food deserts. Number two, making sure that if you are in a food desert and the only thing that you have near you is going to be something where maybe it's going to be frozen food or some quick hot food, making sure that you can still access that food instead of just going and getting, like right now, you can go and get like a cold sandwich out of some of those places and not some of these other foods. And then I had one final point and I forgot. I just lost it. Sorry.
That's all right. Congresswoman, we appreciate your time. I know it's 8:55 and you have to vote. If you are when you're next in San Antonio or Austin, let us know. I know you were here on Sunday. Perhaps we can see you in person. But I appreciate all, you're taking our questions and hearing your answers. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the thoughtful questions. Thank you so much for doing the screening. And again, my whole point is we've got to expand the electorate. And you mentioned that I was just in San Antonio. We did 10 or 11 stops in one day. I am committed to working harder than historically we have ever seen a candidate work to make sure that I show up to the people. We did a total of 17 stops, I think, or more, just in 2 days. And so I think that that's what it's going to take. It's going to take showing up and making sure that people know that I understand the challenges that the farmers and ranchers are facing. I understand the challenges of living in rural America because that's actually where I started my legal career in rural East Texas. So I know what it is to wake up and smell the paper plant, but I also know what it is to have to drive to see a specialist in Shreveport, Louisiana, or go to Dallas to find my specialist, while at the same time being able to be that person that can show up on Sunday morning and go to the churches, as I went to so many on Sunday, because I am a preacher's kid and that is where I grew up. But also, I am that girl that can show up in the more cultural spaces. So Cornyn and I were on the field for the state championship games in Dallas, Texas, where 200,000 fans showed up. I got applause. I will let y'all ask him what he got. And then, I also am able to go into some of the other younger spaces as we are going to make sure that we're getting on the campuses, and we make sure that we are also going into the non-traditional spaces. Like I was able to go to 4 clubs and get in the DJ booth in Houston when I landed on Friday night. So, we're going to see something that we've never seen before, because I think if we want to do something that's never been done before, then we've got to do it a way that has never been done before. So thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for your questions. Please, if you have any additional follow-ups, please reach out. We're here for you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.